How are we doing? Welcome tonight. We're expecting a few more people than are here right now, so I assume we'll be letting people in as they arrive. If not, we have a pretty nice crowd here too. Thank you for being on time. We are here with Tyler, but before I get to introducing him and passing it off to him for the main event, I do want to just go over a few things. Firstly, again, welcome, and this is Writers Live presents Tyler Barton. My name is Chris Jankow. I'm the System Activities Coordinator for the Palm Beach County Library System, and I'm beyond pleased that we are able to get together, preferably in person, but the virtual space will make it work. I just want to let everyone know before we get too far into it, you probably got the warning already, but we are recording for the benefit of everyone that was unable to attend the live event. So that will be published through our website for a brief period of time. Just something to keep in mind as we get through the hour. As I mentioned before, tonight is part of our Writers Live series. The series is now in its 14th year of connecting readers and authors. So we just kicked off this week. This is actually the third event, but we have events running all the way through April. So there's a lot of opportunities for you to revisit us, get connected with some authors, hear some of their perspectives and how they developed their stories, how they got into the publishing world. Only a few of them are in person. I will be dropping a link to let you guys know how to access the entire lineup if you're unfamiliar with it, and you can see how to register and everything that we have coming up. Just a few more things before we get started. I also do want to thank the Friends of the Palm Beach County Library System. This event would not be possible without their support. If you happen to be a Friends member and you're on the call tonight, I want to personally thank you. If you aren't a Friends member, I really do strongly encourage you to consider joining. Your membership dues support library services and hundreds of activities for all ages throughout the county. In addition to supporting the services and activities, you will also receive a home delivered copy of the library's monthly magazine, Happenings. There's so many opportunities to be involved in the board if you're interested in getting even more involved. And all this is a pretty good return on investment. It ends up costing you about $2 a month. So I'll be giving a link in the chat too if you want more information on the Friends. And if you don't have time to look at that tonight, anytime in any of our facilities, you can get more information at any of the service desks. I also want to thank our local book selling partner, Pyramid Books. This June, they'll be celebrating their 29th year in business. They're an awesome independent seller, good friends to the library, very supportive. And they have an awesome selection of books too. But if you happen to order a book through them tonight, let's say Tyler's book or any Writers Live related book, they're being kind enough to offer a promotional discount of 5% off, as well as donate 10% of all their proceeds right back into the library. So that's another way to support the series and events and programs and services from the library throughout the county. We are on Zoom, as I'm sure you're all familiar, and I know we're getting used to it or maybe even a little burnt out, but I'm going to try my best to make sure we stay muted. I mean, it looks like we have a pretty small group, so if we hit a point where we want to unmute, we can discuss that once we get there. But if for any reason it happens sometimes, no big deal, but sometimes there's some inadvertent noise, I'll probably end up having to mute you. I just want to give everyone a heads up to not take that personally. I'll try my best to minimize any disturbances. And that about does it for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our very special guest tonight. Tyler Barton is a writer, literary advocate, and educator whose debut full-length book of fiction, Eternal Night at the Nature Museum, was published by Sarah Band Books in November 2021. He's also the author of a flash fiction collection, The Quiet Part Loud, which was the winner of the Turnbuckle Chapbook Contest from Split Lit Press. His short fiction has been published widely in journals and magazines such as Kenyon Review, Subtropics, the Iowa Review, Gulf Coast, Cincinnati Review, Copper Nickel, and many others. He's also received a 2019 Pennsylvania Council on the Arts grant to teach workshops to seniors in an assisted living facility. The 20 vivid, rowdy, buoyant stories in Eternal Night at the Nature Museum are a collection of unforgettable safe havens, perfect for crashing, even if only for a night. Stories from the collection have been awarded prizes and honors from Kenyon Review, Phoebe Journal, the Chicago Review of Books, the Best of the Net, and Best Small Fictions 2020. Tyler is serving currently as the communication manager for the Adirondack Center for Writing in Saranac Lake, New York, where he's calling in from today, and I've heard it's snowing up there. So we're enjoying a pretty nice day down here. I could use some snow though too, Tyler. Thank you very much for being here. I'll pass it off to you now.
Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for having me, and thank you all for coming. I'm excited to talk a little bit about my book and my work and read some of the fiction from the book too. So again, my name's Tyler Barton, and my book is called Eternal Night at the Nature Museum. It's a book of short stories. So it's about 200 pages long. And in those 200 pages, there are 20 different short stories. So some quick math might make you think that there are 20 10-page stories in this book, but actually my book is really varied in its the way it's put together. There are a number of 30-page stories in the book, and then there are some stories that are only 1 page long. So that's what I want to talk about tonight, is kind of like where the current state of fiction, of short fiction is with taking different forms. So we may all be familiar with a short story from reading in high school, or maybe you enjoy reading story collections. It's not one of the most popular forms out there. Novels are much more popular, but a story collection will often, you'll see 12 stories and they're all about 20 pages in length, like the length of a story you might find in the New Yorker. But especially in the last like 10 to 20 years, there's been a real growth in different types of forms of fiction. So stories that are taking different shapes, stories that look like poems, stories that are really short. And I'm going to share a couple of those tonight. So again, of the 20 stories in my book, there are a number that are called what is referred to as microfiction. Microfiction usually means it's really, really, really short story, maybe a page in length, at most 2 pages in length. I'm going to read an example of that, and then I'll read an example of 2 other types of stories in the book. So there's microfiction, there's flash fiction, and then there's also, you know, a more traditional length short story. But all of the stories, what's holding them together, what makes them belong in the same book, is that all of my work in Eternal Night at the Nature Museum is about home in some very clear way. The first section of the book, all of the stories in the first section of the book, are about people who have just lost their home and are looking for a new home. And then in the middle of the book is stories about people who are considering leaving home, or they're in a liminal space between they have left and they don't know where the next place is yet. Then the last set of stories in the book are all about people who they've found a home, they know where their home is, but they're still restless in some way, and home still isn't filling something in them that they need filled. So it's really about wrestling with all kinds of questions about where to live and how to live. So to start that off, I'm actually going to read one of the shortest stories in the book, and you'll see really quickly how it deals with home. This is called Hiccups Forever, and it is microfiction. That means it's about 1 page long. And this form of microfiction really prizes images, language, and the kinds of things that you might look for in poems. These types of stories are not only really short, but usually really lyrical, which is a word that we use to mean focused on language, associative leaps, and details, more so than a very clear beginning, middle, and end. So let me read this as an example. So this is called Hiccups Forever. An hour after it happened, I watched our house explode. Friday in History 9. Evan's phone got passed around under the tables. I was the last one to watch the video. I dropped his phone, cracked the screen. Then the hiccups came, and they haven't left. You can still watch the video on YouTube. It's there. Search York County home disintegrates in gas explosion. A cop car parked on our block had a dash cam going. It's a normal day, spring, blue sky. Mr. Sims has Groucho on a walk. On the left, a white house goes pufferfish. For a millisecond, it's still our house, just expanded with space in between every piece. You can see sky through each tiny seam. My green room spreads out, then confetti, black confetti. Our dog dies. Groucho barks. Mr. Sims runs past the camera. Nobody knew it was my house when they handed me the phone that day in History 9. They didn't even know my name is Kara. I watched it anyway. I've watched it a lot. The video played on Facebook all weekend. People said it was awesome, which was weird. But I shared it too. 27 likes. It's a personal record. La Quinta's manager put my parents in separate rooms. The other guests couldn't sleep with all their loud blame. My sister Jenna told me, kiss everything normal goodbye. And, I can't sleep with you making those noises. So I've been lying on a booth in the hotel breakfast nook every night, wondering what she means and hiccuping. Nobody's sharing the video anymore, but I still watch it a lot on the computer in the lobby, full screened, reversed, dragging the button left across the page, slow as possible. It's cool. Every piece has somewhere to go. Everything shrinks back together. My hiccups disappear. My hiccups stop. It's weird. Played forward, the house pieces float there until they disappear. That's the future, I think, what Jenna means. When I let go of the mouse, I hiccup. 8 seconds, our house is over. Even the smoke's gone. Just blue, springtime, Groucho barking like we were never there. But watching in reverse, it's different. In reverse, I can breathe. Plus, it's prettier, like a party when everyone finally shows up before anybody starts to leave. Thank you. So that is a little story that takes up about a page and a half in the book. And it's a story that actually was a longer short story at one point. It was about 10 or 12 pages. And then as I kept revising it, I just kept honing in on these, really these 3 scenes. The scene of the character, the main character, the narrator, Kara, this sudden moment of seeing a YouTube video that all the kids are sharing in her class. They're sharing, everyone wants to see this YouTube video, and she recognizes what's happening in the video as her house being the one that exploded. So there was that scene. And then I had a lot of other things happening in the story, but really that was what felt the most important. And then having this character then staying in a hotel, the family falling apart or going through a lot of trauma, and the sister saying some scary things to her. And then the final scene of her watching the YouTube video in reverse of dragging the thing back. So those were like the 3 moments I wanted to focus on. And when I cut those moments out of the longer story, I found myself with about a page and a half of writing, and I thought it worked really well as a microfiction. And sometimes I think of microfiction more like poetry. You really condense and condense and condense until you're just left with the most bright and shining parts of the story. And really, I think that's all I want to read sometimes. So that's an example. There's 3 or 4 stories in the book that are 1 page in length. They're really quick hits. They often come right after a story that's like 20 or 25 pages long. So they're acting like little breaks in between where you're getting something different from the collection. Because I really wanted to avoid having a bunch of stories that all sounded the same, all had the exact same structure and flow and feel. I wanted the book to kind of be all over the place. So even though the stories are all very different in their form and the way they're told, they're still, what connects them is this idea of home in some way. So this next piece I'm going to read is another type of story from the book. So if I said one of the types of stories is microfiction, those really, really short stories, then this is flash fiction, which is another cool term that's been used in the last, I think it's been popularized in the last 10 years or so. It's really blown up with as a form. A lot of people are writing in flash fiction because it's an exciting form to work in. It gives you a little bit more space. You don't have to keep it to 1 page. It can be about 3 or 4 pages, usually under 1,000 words. So this story I'm going to read is about 3 pages in length. And you'll see the ways that it's still very imagistic, still a lot of language play going on and sound in the writing, but there's a little bit more of a clear narrative happening. At least I hope so. Plus lots of room for jokes, which I think this story has. So this is an example of flash fiction. There are probably 4 or 5 stories in this book that are in the category of flash fiction. So this is one. This is called The Skins. The producer wanted wet hands, sweaty and tense to where the sound really snapped. So my team detained the clappers in an overwarm anteroom beside the recording booth. We made them wait. Clammy, anxious, beating on the soundproof door, they said, "We're still in here." Eventually, they were released, palms moist, only to find their mark at the mic and fail her. Each time the producer sighed. The perfect clap was somewhere far off, but she assured my team and I, reachable. She wanted trim nails. She wanted short fingers. I need compact percussion. At noon, she called the bassist hand clap languorous. I need hands that don't take all day to come together. We brought in children, but they had no strength. We brought in brawny wrestlers, varsity, but rhythmless. And even though I could have made it match the beat in post, the producer wanted someone with an intuition she could sense, a soul she could hear on tape. She wanted my team to stop bickering. The chat about the proper pop filter had spiraled into a dispute over whether, in a finger snap, the sound was in the friction between the thumb and middle finger, or rather in the fingers striking the palm. Battle lines were drawn, mapping neatly onto two worldviews, neither of which the producer was interested in exploring right now. Thank you very much. An intern was let go. "What if you just do this clap yourself?" I asked her, trying to distract from the episode. We'd probably have it in like one take. But this song was part of her Selfless series, records with pages and pages of credits. "One is only built from a pile of others," read the pull quote from her Vibe interview, even though the album art was always front and back full bleed headshots of the producer's stoic pout. "No, Ziegler," she said. She loved to put a touch of Dutch on the pronunciation of my name, even though I had never stepped foot in Europe. She had her own engineer in every country, refused to fly me out for tour. "It's not my role to clap," she said, pressing the delete key to erase an entire track. So I brought in music students who cupped their hands in exotic ways. It didn't take. We got creative, idiotic. We had a policeman fire a gun. They were blanks, but still. "It sounds forced," she said. One by one, my team began to flee, talking of union contracts, families, the sour taste left over from the finger snap debacle. "It's getting dark," they said. "Outside, too." Hours meant nothing. What were hours? The coming lump sum would float my team through another summer. The payday was out there somewhere, invisible but within grasp. Marcus and I had decided not to adopt until I was established, until I was until my name was a stock you could trade. "You're getting all their information, right?" she asked from inside her stress-relieving VR headset. "The failures, I mean. I need each one credited." "Yes," I assured her, and then made more calls. Calls, calls, calls until my phone died. I wandered down the street, past the cafe, past the poke bowl place, and past the new lofts and into the barber school. They didn't seem to understand my request, but I left an address. One man set down his scissors and shook my hand. The producer ate dinner, a family-sized bag of peanut M&Ms, right there at the soundboard. She'd suck the candy down to its furrowed core, pinch the nut from her tongue, and stack each one beside the mixer. It was times like these that I would try to break a clipboard with my hands. I'm still working on it. Perfection to me is a pile of trying. The pile grows high enough to be enough. "You know, Ziegler," she said, "I'm not paying you for an opinion." And before I could sulk away to send some emails, she softened, turned to me, and confessed that perfection was immortal. "Omnipotent yet quotidian," she said, "like finding a dropped dollar." I said, "More like a million of them all at once." Our only agreement was that the hand clap is the supreme snare. No drum, acoustic or digital, sounds immaculate as that. Two hands brought together. To this day, I get a little kick anytime someone calls a set of drums the Skins. So when the barbers arrived, the producer was sugar crashed on the couch, face down, so I led the session, instructing them through the microphone. "Just clap," I said, forgetting to hit record, and the four men began to applaud. My team was gone, so I cracked up all alone. My laughter woke the producer, who stood and leaned over the board, watching as they kept clapping. "Who are these men?" I said. "Barbers." I said, sorry, who are these men? She said. Barbers, I said. She touched the red button to capture their ovation. They work with their hands, she said, raising her arms above her head, a victory, a stretch. The song, you'll notice, is totally snareless. No claps, no snaps, no pillars prop up its structure. It marks the start of her formless phase. You can hear a thread throughout, soft in the background, applause like rain. And if you scroll through the credits, you'll find me buried there beneath a sea of names. Thank you. So that story, The Skins, is an example of flash fiction. So it's a short story in its own right. A lot of times we'll write short stories that are just really short and they won't even be called flash fiction. But in the last few years, they've kind of given it its own genre because it kind of operates in different ways. There's a lot more room for, again, focusing on poetic language and maybe exploring character a little bit in different ways, especially the way characters talk. I tend to use a lot of first-person narrators in my stories because, and a first person meaning using the word, the pronoun I throughout, because I like to put on the page the way people talk and the way that phrases come out of their mouths. I like to try to get that down. So the last thing I'll read is an example of that as well as with a first person narrator. And this is an example of the third type of story in the book, which is like a more traditional short story. This story is about 12 pages in length. I'm only going to read a little bit of it, but it'll give you an idea of what those stories feel like. They roll out a little bit slower and there's a little bit more plot to them. And you know, I like to use flash fiction like the story that I just read when I want to explore a scene that a story that takes place in a really condensed period of time. So that whole story, The Skins, about the producer trying to find the perfect clap, that story really takes place all in one day, kind of one long afternoon and evening. So it made sense for it to stay short because it's a short condensed period of time. And this story, which is a short story, you know, it's 12 pages long. It's got a couple of different moments in it and it's not all on the same night. So that oftentimes, if I want to tell a story that's going to span more time, it'll have to be a longer short story and won't work so much for these really, really short pieces. So this last piece is from late in the book and it is called Miss Botislavs' Vomit, which is kind of an aggressive title, but I like the way it sounds, and you'll see at one point why it's called that. But Miss Botislavs' Vomit, this is a story that really started with one sentence that I had written in a notes app on my phone for the longest time. I was just waiting for the right time to think of what to do with it. But that sentence was, our church had a drive-through window. And because I saw that certain places like the Hardee's in my town that I grew up in being repurposed and used for a different thing. You know how sometimes the building, you can tell, oh, that used to be a Pizza Hut, but they just put a Verizon store in it. I think that happened with the Hardee's in my town. It wasn't turned into a church, but it was turned into something else. And it was funny that there was still a drive-through window on like a cell phone store. So I was imagining, what if you turned in an old Hardee's into a church? So this is called Miss Botislavs' Vomit. Check the time quick. Okay. So I'm just going to read a little bit from this story. Miss Botislavs' Vomit. Our church had a drive-through window. It was meant for those who couldn't make the service, who couldn't take another night like the one they'd had before. Those disgruntled and hungry few who, wishing the squat blue building was still a Hardee's, drove through just to air their grievances. The window, its glass permanently stained with, was open all weekend long. And one Sunday morning, beneath that open window, we found Pastor Christine hogtied, asleep on the floor. Our donation box gone. The pastor was fine physically and insisted on delivering her sermon, in which she declared that if you're looking for God, even in the ski-masked face of an attacker, you will find God. Example A, to back up this claim, was that she told the attacker she'd pray for him and he thanked her. Example B was that she spoke of the robins that had flown in during the early morning hours and started a nest in the old soda fountain behind our altar. The birds had even used our church merch, threads from our cotton tees, bits of our now it's a gift, now is a gift, that's why they call it the present bumper stickers, in the weaving of their home. No one asked for evidence to back these crazy claims. When she got on a roll, reality itself seemed to hover just above the ground. These creatures came to us, she preached. We've made a sanctuary. It was a tough sell, convincing us the burglary was a feature, not a bug, of our new community outreach project, the DriveThru Prayer. Listen, Chris, someone said, can we close this damn drive-through already? The voice came from a corner booth. Most tables hadn't been converted yet to pews, the bulk of our funds having been spent to paint the puke blue walls white. It's unsafe plus unpopular, the woman said. The speaker, Miss Botislav, was my agitated psych teacher who seemed to hate our church yet attended every week. Someone with whom I noticed our fearless pastor never made eye contact. Let's just give it up, she said. The 20-person congregation groaned in agreement, the noise echoing off the plastic order boards still mounted onto the walls. But Pastor Christine was adamant about staying open. She said the night spent on the floor of the vestibule had been humbling, that she'd heard God whistling through the windows of her dreams. In fact, she wanted the drive-through operational every night of the week. Yes, starting tomorrow. And were there any volunteers? Come on, people, she said, stomping. Communities don't make themselves. So I stood up. The congregants gasped. I needed community service hours in order to graduate. Yes, there was the fact that I hated people, almost everyone, especially the locals of Deliver, a place voted number 3 in Pennsylvania's top small towns to leave. I went to church mainly to get away from my family, to feel sullen before the epic grace of God, who I did not quite believe in, but had always secretly wished to reach, like the unbeatable boss at the end of an RPG. A popular school-wide joke was that I'd be nominated most likely to shoot the place up. But there was also a chance my father, long ago a faithful member, might stop by to pray forgiveness. Maybe lecture me about all the data I was using to watch porn on my smartphone. He'd left a month ago in the middle of an ugly fight with Mom where, to underscore a point, he put a pair of hedge clippers through our above-ground pool, flooding the patio so bad the water dripped from the ceiling of my basement bedroom. Our church, though recently robbed, suffering from low attendance, inhabited by eccentrics and birds, was one of the more stable institutions in my life. Pastor Christine shook my hand hard and then called for a round of applause. That Monday, Pastor Christine coached me through my first shift. She'd cut her hair off and looked a bit like Alice from Resident Evil, but with braces. Her hands shook, so she sat on them. Most people who stop by are just curious, she said. Offer basic info on our church, service times, dates for the barbecue. Don't get bogged down in scripture and interpretation of rules. Don't debate the half-baked philosophy majors. Some people will want to pray with you, and that's what it's all about. Remember, focus on gratitude, not desire. And what about the people who want to rob us? I said. She was silent, staring out at the dark, empty parking lot. Just give, she said, eventually. Just give whatever they asked for. With my pastor right beside me, I couldn't use my phone, so I passed the hours searching her Bible for its more cinematic moments. Floods, miracles, cities destroyed, but all I kept finding were the lists of names, the beginning and begotten. The only person to stop by was an old man who didn't know how to roll his window down and yelled through the glass that he wanted a roast beef and 2 Cokes, and one of the Cokes was a Dr. Pepper. I waved a brochure at him, pantomimed prayer. He gave me the finger and left. Just think, Pierce, the pastor said, handing me a church key so I could let myself in the next night. This will make the perfect college admission essay. I think we both knew that I would never apply to college, but we knew it. But what neither of us knew was how I'd stagger into adulthood like a slow crash, burn for a decade, see my own death reflected in the eye of a wild ocean, and finally return to work as a custodian for the now thriving, expanded First Community Church of Deliver. by that time housed in a converted bus depot with seating for 300 and no plastic booths crusted to hell with stuck gum. In fact, I'm glad neither of us saw this coming. Life should be lived in providence, not prophecy. At home that night, my mother was in my bedroom poking at the growing green spot in the corner of my ceiling. The pool water was seeping in and my room smelled like Clorox. You know what this means, she said, touching the swampy ceiling tile. Mom taught English lit in the next county over and lived by the metaphor of everything. I was tired and depressed about the roast beef and Dr. Pepper guy and just wanted to go to sleep. I looked out the window, checked the backyard for my father's truck. I think it means you're over chlorinating the pool. No, it's the void, love, my mom said. It seeks us out. It always meets us exactly where we are. She went on and on as I fell asleep. The it she rambled about sounding a lot like Pastor Christine's idea of God. Most of the next night's window I spent bored on my phone, surfing porn, openly inviting God not to speak to me. I've been watching these videos when the night's first car pulled into the window. You about bored, Miss Botislav said, idling. She had a curly ball of black hair, sharp blue eyes, and a mole on her cheek that looked like a piece of Cookie Crisp cereal. She taught psychology and economics, which was for some reason a single class. Maslow's hierarchy, id and the ego, the archetypes of dreams. This was her Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but Tuesday, Thursday was supply and demand, inflation, a Wall Street simulation game called Mock Market. No matter what day of the week, when you walked into Miss Botislav's room, Tracy Chapman's fast car blasted from her laptop. Besides that, she was totally unpredictable, shouty and bitter in lectures, and often late to class. Twice she'd canceled tests to show us her taped from TV copy of Sunday Bloody Sunday, while she plucked nose hairs using her webcam as a mirror. She honked her car's weak horn at me as I sat there in the drive-thru. I'm fine, I said, slipping my phone under a Bible on the counter, an unsmooth move I used in her class often. It's pretty chill here, kind of meditative, just sitting, looking out. Oh, at this beautiful parking lot, she said. And that rusted fence over there, very tranquil. Nothing screams zen like broken beer bottles and no loitering signs. I laughed. Was this flirting? The closest I had come to flirting was giving this androgynous night elf all my rare swords in World of Warcraft. I leaned forward in my chair, my head a little out the window, and noticed her eyes were bloodshot to. What? She said. You see the devil in me? No, I said. Is Chris even here? She asked. Just me, I said. Pastor Christine is, taking a hiatus from the drive-thru, considering. If I ever find that, Miss Botislav said, but she looked disappointed. Her car, a junky sky-colored Camry from the early 90s, rattled harshly, the ceiling liner drooping onto her head. I heard the snap hiss of a can opening. Miss Botislav brought a Yingling to her lips and turned her stereo up. Tracy Chapman's low, smoky voice was unmistakable. You and I can both get jobs and finally see what it means to be living. Sorry, I didn't sing that for you guys. She handed the can out of her window. I believe now that this night was the closest I ever came to God, but at 17, sitting in the drive-thru of my church, I just thought this woman was weirdly into me. I can't, I said, about her offer of beer, thinking of Mom pumping my father's entire keg of lager down the tub the day he stabbed the pool and left. How she'd tossed the empty drum down the wooded hill of our backyard. How I'd counted the blackbirds that escaped into the sky, 21. Huh, my teacher said. Chris always trades sips with me when she prays with me. I reached through the open window and she put the can in my hand. The first sip tasted like wet wood. As I leaned out to hand it back, I took a long look around the parking lot from my father's truck. The place was empty. He was never coming. He would never be watching. I took another sip. What do you two pray about? I said. Oh, everything, Miss Botislav said. Opposite things, honestly, like Chris prays for her teeth to finally turn straight. And I pray she never takes those braces off because I love the way they cut up my tongue. And Chris prays the church will survive the downturn. I pray she leaves her husband, and I pray for more beer, and she prays for forgiveness for the ones we've emptied. She prays for the world to disarm and join hands, but I pray for an explosion we can watch from the rear view on the interstate, the windows all down, hands clasped together in the gear shift. Am I being too poetic? I pictured her face, taut and red in the grip of lecture. I thought of her and Pastor Christine together, their secret, sacred community of two. I tried to act unsurprised, cool and detached, like a man who enters the kitchen to find a woman in the window. Poetic, I said. In class, she said, do I sound like a hippie? Do I come off like a bitter hippie? You come off like psych and econ are just horrible games rich men play like golf. She opened the car door, planted her hands on the drive-through windowsill, and said, that's the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. She hoisted herself up, bent at the waist, and yelled, man overboard, as she tumbled face first into the church, kicking the shelf above the window. An old box of straws rained down onto our heads. I gave her space. I sat on the floor. For the rest of my second night at the window, I watched Mrs. Botislav command the drive-through. I took notes, drinking my half of every Yingling. It seemed as if her very presence in that office chair brought people to us. We stayed open well past midnight. 8 cars came in total, and at one point, there was a short line. So I'm going to stop the story there. There's about 2 more pages left, but I'll leave that there. So now that Miss Botislav has joined the narrator in the drive-through window, then they experience a series of visitors coming to pray with them in the Hardy's church. So I'll take that as my stopping point, but that's an example, as you can see, of a longer story and the way it can roll out and have a multiple time period or stretch across multiple days. So there's a couple of days that we're covering here, and we can get a little bit deeper with the backstories of some of these characters in the longer form too. So yeah, I just wanted to give you kind of a tour of my book and talk about the different lengths of stories that you'll encounter here. And also, if you're interested in writing yourself, I think writing these types of short works of prose, microfiction, flash fiction can be really instructive and can teach you a lot about writing. For every story that's in this book, all the 20 stories, there are for each of the 20 stories in here, there are 20 stories that have failed. So 20 times 20, I'm not good at math, but there are a lot of failed stories that did not make it in this book. But every time I've tried to write something and it's failed, it's taught me something, and I try to take that lesson into the next thing. So even now, after having published many short stories and now publishing 2 books of short stories, I still sit down most days, and what I write ends up not working out, but I'll find a new subject and a new approach the next day. And sometimes it requires you to rework a piece and try to make it shorter, or to try to expand on a shorter piece and make it longer. So I want to open things up to questions if there are any, especially if there's any questions about writing process, or I'm happy to talk about the industry side of it too, like how my book found a publisher, any of those things. I'm not sure what y'all are interested in, but I'm happy to talk about whatever. And thanks so much for listening to those stories.
Thank you, Tyler. No questions have come in the chat box yet. If anyone wants to drop some in there, or even unmute yourself, I'm think we're open to that. But Todd did say he can't wait to get to the last 2 pages of that last story you read.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I really enjoyed everything you did. It was really excellent, and it's exactly the kind of writing that I enjoy reading and exploring.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
Thank you for
Glad to hear that. Yeah, that story, Miss Botislav's vomit, that is indicative of probably the bulk of the book. Most of the stories in the book are in that space of being, between 8 and 15 pages. So gives it a little bit more room to breathe. And I like those stories a lot, but I'm also a big fan of experimentation with writing. And I think you'll find that with some of the shorter pieces in the book. I think sometimes writing in a compressed format in these really short spaces can bring out new things that you never expected. So if there's anyone here who's interested in writing themselves, I say, give it a shot. See what you can accomplish in just a single page of writing. It might not always work out, but it can be kind of exciting. Yeah.
Erin in the chat has asked, well, she said she's excited to pick your book up, and she's wondering which story would you say is your favorite to write in the collection?
Oh, that's a great question. Two immediately jump to mind, and I actually didn't read either of them tonight, but the first story in the book is called Once Nothing, Twice Shatter, and it is one of the longest stories in the book. And it was my favorite to write because it started in the way that all of my favorite stories start, which is I came across a bit of language, kind of stole that bit of language and used it in the story to catalyze the whole story. So in Minnesota, I was on a drive after a literary reading coming home, and I saw a big billboard that said Luther buys cars, and the first sentence in my book is Luther buys cars. And I don't know why that just spoke to me. Maybe it was the name Luther, because you don't really see that name a lot, but I also just started getting this idea of Luther's buying everyone's car. Maybe he's buying so many cars that he's building a demolition derby. And then I was like, well, what happens at a demolition derby? I used to race go-karts as a kid and spent a lot of time at the track and places like that. And there was always kind of like a cultish, feverish like feeling at the track, and like a real kind of world within a world. So I started imagining this guy who buys up as many cars as he can because he's making this great demolition derby. And then the demolition derby slowly turns into a cult, which sounds like a big leap, but it happens. I think it rolls out pretty nicely in the story. So I won't spoil any more of it, but that was my favorite story to write because I am obsessed with cults and with what I call like worlds within the world, where it's a tight-knit community in some way that feels like they have created a world within our world. And I like to write about those spaces. So that one was a lot of fun to write, had a lot of energy, all starting from the really kind of simple and seemingly uninteresting sentence of Luther buys cars. And then another favorite story of mine, it's one of the microfictions. It's called Midtown, and it's about a poetry reading and an experience that happens at a poetry reading. And I personally just love that story because I wrote the story mostly while I was at a poetry reading and kind of right after the reading ended, because I was very inspired, and I can remember exactly where I was sitting. I can remember the reader. It was actually, of course, I'm going to forget his name now. I will think of it, but it was an excellent reading and inspired me to write this thing. And the bookstore is called the Midtown Scholar. It's in Harrisburg, PA. So I titled the story Midtown, and I see that as a wink to like my favorite bookstore. And that one was so much fun to write as well. Thank you. That was a great question.
Thank you. And Todd wants you to know that he grew up in Northern Indiana, and demolition derbies were all the Saturday rage. Friend.
Oh, very cool. There is there's a story in this book set in Portage, Indiana, so like way north Indiana. And so there's no demolition derby there, but there is cars. There tends to be cars in all of my stories, and I'm not sure what that is about. I really do think my book is about home, but almost all the stories, there's people either smashing up cars or driving fast in cars or selling cars or being in a drive-through window. But thanks for that.
I'll throw in a question
Sure.
While we're waiting on maybe a few here, if people want to type anything. But I am kind of curious, clearly you're very into this form, the shorter form. Did you ever flirt with the idea of doing a more traditional length novel or even story, or do you see yourself ever getting into that, or are you really just like cultivating this for a while?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of fiction writers learn to write by writing short stories, and they kind of use that as a space to learn their craft, find their voice, and just work out how narrative works. And then it seems as though often short stories are then left behind. They're seen as like this training ground for learning to write so that you can build the skills necessary to write a novel, which is the type of book that's often held up as great literature. And there's plenty of exceptions to that, general idea, but I really push against that. I have nothing against novels, and I love novels, and I am writing one right now. But I have never, I mean, I finished a draft of a novel, but it was no good. Every writer has at least a couple of those. I just think it could have to do with an attention span, but I think it's more complicated than that. I really love writing for writing's sake. And I know I don't align with a lot of writers that, like, a lot of writers, their mission is to just tell the most moving story they possibly can. I do want to tell stories that move people, whether it's move them to laugh or to feel for the characters. And that is always involved in my stories. But I have to be honest that I'm just more interested in language. I'm much more poetically minded when it comes to writing. If I'm reading a book and at the line level, at the level of the sentence, there's not really rich in the sentences and the using figurative language and using things like rhyme and alliteration and even just syntax and the way sentences are structured, I kind of lose interest. So I'm really a writer who's focused on words and what language can do, and that ends up lending itself better to exploring in short fiction, I think, because when I write, often it's in this lyrical style or in a very energetic style, and that kind of energy and lyricism can be hard to hold up over an entire novel. There's plenty of novels that do it, but I'm just more excited in doing little experiments that are shorter. And I still get a lot from reading flash fiction, from reading poetry. I read about as much poetry as I do fiction, which is probably why I write in this somewhat hybrid form of these really short stories. But I still write long stories all the time too. And I think there's plenty of, traditional length stories in this book, but yeah, I'm a huge proponent of the short story as a form. And I always want to try to fight back against the idea that the short story is just simply a training ground or a practice space for like the real work, which is the novel. Some of that is more in my head. I don't think people are really saying that kind of thing out loud, but I do think it's the general bias of the reading public and writers too, is like, well, if I'm going to do important work, I've got to write the great American novel. Like, we don't really talk about the great American short story collection, but I think there are plenty out there. Plenty of great books of stories, including some that take the shape of novels, like A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan, or Justin Torres's book, We the Animals, which was turned into an excellent movie recently. Both of those books are novels, but they're kind of told in short stories. So even then, the short story is getting a short shrift because it's being erased and called a novel when really it is a series of short stories. But so yeah, I'm just always going to be out here holding up the flag for short stories and saying these are important and interesting, and this is where fiction can find ways to grow and change and push out of boundaries a little bit. Again, nothing against novels or novelists. I do hope to publish a novel one day, but I think I'll never stop writing stories is the main point. I don't want to ever think of writing stories or short fiction or flash fiction as something that you only do when you're learning to write, but something that's always there as a tool in the writer's toolbox. So thanks. That was a great question.
Thanks for that answer.
Yeah.
A lot of really good points that you made, and I think you have a really distinct voice, and like your love for language clearly comes across, especially on those really short ones. I mean, you're hilarious. Groucho Bark is one of the funniest things. You just sneak it in and then you move on really quick. I mean, you mentioned your attention. It almost goes. Sorry.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. I think sometimes I worry at live readings that because the text is really rich, I'm only writing in 2 pages, then every word is like there's a lot going on and a lot to pick up on. And I know for myself, as I attend readings all the time, it's not always easy to follow even a very straightforward story through a literary reading. So I'm glad you were able to pick up on some of that stuff. And if it felt like a whirlwind, some of those stories, I understand, because there is a lot happening in every sentence. But I think that the book allows for slower reading than the pace at which I read. So, but yeah.
I recently moved here from the Pacific Northwest, and there was a lot of access to live open readings and poetry readings, and there was just a tremendous amount of access to that. having moved back here to South Florida to work for a company that I worked for before I left South Florida,
Mm.
I would really like to get connected with the writing community, and I want to be attending these many readings that you're speaking about. So how do we get connected, stay connected, or become connected with the greater writing community that's in this area, this West Palm Beach area, this Palm Beach County area?
I
Oh,
don't
you
know
first.
if, yeah, so Tyler's calling in from New York, you know, so and I was talking to him before we came on the call about some stuff going on in Miami, which is sort of far away. But they have a very vibrant poetry scene down there. But we also here, I can't remember what day of the week, but are you familiar with the Arts Garage in Delray? I know they have a monthly open mic night, or a weekly one. I mean, I think it might be Monday nights.
Okay.
And if you want, I will drop my email address in the chat, because there are a couple literary groups that do programming with the library, or just you know, they get together and just discuss their work that I can connect you with too. Okay.
Super.
I'm gonna go ahead and drop that in there in a second. I appreciate the question though, because there's definitely stuff going on here, and if you like poetry, there's like a annual poetry festival that happens here too, that I'll give you some more info on as well. Thanks for that though, and hope to, if you have more questions, let me know. I'm going to move on to a question that came in from Erin, Tyler.
Yeah.
Where she says she appreciates the lyricism of your flash fiction, which I do too.
Thanks.
She says, do you write songs as well, or do you use songs for inspiration?
That's a really good question. I don't write song lyrics. I do kind of write songs through digital audio workspaces. Like I use Ableton Live to make like kind of electronic music, house music, but that's kind of just a hobby of mine. I don't really put it out there to the world, but I'm very interested in music, and music. I'm always listening to music while I'm writing, but usually music without lyrics. So that's what brings me to like a lot of like, you know, like beat making and house music and stuff. But I will say, on the subject of that, there's a story in this book. It's very different and very musically inspired. It is called Cowboy Man Major Player, and it is a story that was written because I was tweeting a bunch about how much I love the band Modest Mouse, especially their early albums, their first few albums, The Lonesome Crowded West, Moon in Antarctica, and Long Drive. And an editor reached out to me and was like, hey, have you ever written about Modest Mouse? And I was like, no, I don't really write nonfiction right now. I write short fiction. And she was like, well, you know, what if you wrote a short story about Modest Mouse? And I was like, well, that sounds like a really hard prompt. But the more I thought about it, I came up with something I really liked, which was imagining a character, Cowboy Dan, from one of their early songs in the 90s, imagining what Cowboy Dan's life would be like now in the information age. And so Cowboy Dan, as a character in the first page, like discovers that he is a meme on the internet, like that an image of him playing bass on stage has been used to create a meme that's being shared all over, and he wants to get this meme taken off the internet. And he's kind of a Luddite and doesn't have an internet presence, and is trying to explore ways to get this image like removed. Like he thinks he can erase a meme from the internet. So that's his like goal in the story. He ends up meeting some other musicians, and it's very much, there's all kinds of Modest Mouse lyrics appear sneakily in the text. So like there'll be things that people say that make sense in the conversation of the story, but if you know that there's that thing that the character just said is a lyric from a Modest Mouse song. So I thought that was a really fun story to write, and it actually ends up working really well in this collection, because again, that story becomes about home and how the town that Cowboy Dan is in has changed so much due to like gentrification, information age, surveillance capitalism, things like that. So anyway, that was a great question. But yeah, no, I've never written lyrics. I used to play in hardcore metal and punk bands, but I always just played guitar or bass. I didn't write the lyrics, but I love lyrics. I'm really digging this new band called Black Country New Road. They just put out an album this week, and their lyrics are like nothing I've ever heard. It's like reading someone's poetry. It's so good. Anyway. I'm rambling, but that was a great question.
That's awesome story. Do you know if Isaac Brock has actually read the story at all, or given you any feedback? Or
I don't think so. I put a little thing in the back of the book that said, if you read the Cowboy Dan Major Player story, and if you find all of the references to Modest Mouse, email me and I'll send you a prize. But no one's emailed me yet, so that's still out there though.
Nice. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thanks for that question.
Yeah, that's Erin for you. Seems like she's enjoying the talk. Nothing else in there right now. Before
Cool.
we go to, if you have a few minutes, maybe if there's anything that's been capturing your interest as a reader that you'd like to share with us on the call here that we might want to check out.
Oh yeah,
that'd be really nice.
Yeah, for sure. I'm always happy to talk about that. Actually, since I kind of like railed against novels for a minute, I'll talk about a novel I just read is a contemporary Western. It's called Pity the Beast by Robin McLean. It came out just late last year, and it is an amazing book. It is doing the kind of thing I was saying a lot of novels can't do, which is it is like 350 pages, but every single sentence in the book is exciting, interesting, full of energy, very voicey and experimental. Like I said, it's a Western, so it follows characters who are like on a chase for another character through the mountains in like Western Nevada, I think. And all of the animals that are with them, the horses, the mules, you get their perspective. Like you get to hear the mules' thoughts, and the horses, they don't speak out loud, but you get to hear like what's going on in their head. And I think that is so great. It's a realistic novel, but she gives herself the permission to go into the minds of animals, and I like that a lot. The book was incredibly exciting. I will say though, there's a trigger warning. It is pretty rough in the opening of the book. There is some sexual assault in the beginning, but it's very redemptive and exciting story. Pity the Beast by Robin McLean. And then, yeah, probably the only other book I would say is The Disconnect by Royce and Kibbard. That's a book of memoir and essays, all about like growing up with the internet and then trying to disconnect from the internet and the ways that being online can kind of mess with your brain. And I've been interested in that lately and trying to make my relationship with the internet a little bit healthier. I think you'll pick up on that on some of the stories. There's some disillusion and bitterness with technology and the internet. And, I love it, but I also hate it in so many ways. And so I'm interested in rethinking how I relate to the internet. So if you have similar like thoughts or fears about, kind of what's happening with your data, or even just what's happening in your brain being on Instagram all day, it's a really great book, and it's not preachy at all. It's just well researched and really written from a place of like a good place. It's not trying to teach you how to live your life. It's just explaining like kind of her journey through the internet. So yeah, that's The Disconnect by Royce and Kibbard. I would suggest that too. She's an Irish writer. Yeah, great question.
Awesome. I appreciate those recommendations. They sound awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, definitely. I think that will leave us off here at a good point, seeing that there aren't more questions in here. I appreciate you time sharing your work, really giving us I didn't really know how a lot of those formats worked either. So I appreciate your knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. And you can look any of those turns up, and you'll find lots of literary journals that are, focusing only in microfiction or in flash fiction. And you'll also find those in bigger literary journals as well. It's a really fervent, or I guess fertile is the word. It's a very fertile ground for exciting new work is coming out of like really short fiction. So if you're interested, just Google it. You'll find a ton of stuff about it. So thanks again.
Will we get the transcript of today's reading so we can revisit some of the titles that were mentioned, or is there a way we can come back to some of what you spoke about during the call?
Yeah, Todd. when you email me, I'll send you some stuff. If you pre-registered via email, I have everyone's email address. I was going to send the video, but I can make sure you get the transcript too. But
yeah, I did.
I
did pre-register. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Perfect.
Yeah, no problem, Todd. Thank
Great.
you. One more time, I want to thank everyone on the call. Big round of applause for Tyler.
Thank you.
The book is awesome. The words are it's just worth it for the words. And I mean, you really captured this, I hate to use the word like absurd experience of kind of being in small town America that you don't really imagine when you think of small town America. You really get into some nice levels of talking about that kind of stuff too. So just want to thank you here, and hopefully one day we can get you down here in person when things clear up, and
it'd be great.
Enjoy the rest of your night.
Absurd is definitely the way to put it, but it's fun. It's fun. So thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good night, everyone.